And if you can, just make sure your name is correct and add your affiliation, that'd be great.
We're now live. Okay, we're live.
Great. Okay.
So Signe, whenever you're ready, and I'll start the screen
I'll make
share.
the announcement first.
Okay.
Welcome to the March 22nd Public Design Commission meeting. I'm sorry? Good morning, and welcome to the March 22nd Public Design Commission meeting. And if you are watching us on YouTube now, please note that we are not taking public testimony for committee meeting items. If you would like to testify on anything on the public hearing agenda today, please watch on YouTube until we're ready to announce that project and sign in and join the Zoom meeting then. You can find information on how to join in the description below the YouTube video. Okay, Signe.
Good morning. My name is Signe Nielsen. I'm president of the Public Design Commission. So we're going to start this committee meeting with a presentation of 175 Park Avenue, a commercial office and hotel building with public plazas. To reiterate what Carrie said, we will not be hearing public testimony, nor will the commissioners vote on this project today. So please proceed, team.
Okay, I'm unmuting you, Chris, and I believe I gave you control. There we go. And Jeff, yeah. I'll unmute. Okay, can we unmute Jeff Nelson? Sorry, I can't. I don't want to touch my cursor, so Chris has control. And then Isabel also needs to be unmuted.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great. Good morning. It's great to be with you. I'm Jeff Nelson with RXR Realty. We're partnered with TF Cornerstone on the redevelopment of 175 Park, which is at the site of the Grand Hyatt Hotel. Just to briefly touch on TF and RXR, we're multi-generational firms and really share a long-term commitment to the city's success. Our work spans both commercial and residential projects. We collectively own about 25 million square feet of commercial space in the region and thousands of residential units. We also, I want to note, have extensive experience with public-private partnership, whether TF Cornerstone's work on the Long Island City waterfront with the city and state, as well as RXR's work in Hudson River Park, the redevelopment of terminals at JFK, and then our leadership's extensive public sector experience. So far, we've worked extensively with your team, DCP, MTA, SHPO, and many other agencies to get to this point where we are today. We presented to Landmarks last month and are really thrilled that the commission found that our building will have a harmonious relationship with Grand Central Terminal. And so we're excited to be presenting to you all today at the Public Design Commission and want to thank you in advance for your time. So just to jump right into the presentation, as you see on the screen here, the Grand Hyatt site is one of the most significant locations really within the greater East Midtown rezoning area. This is a rezoning the city undertook to encourage the development of new 21st century office space, to upgrade transit connections, to enhance the public realm, all of which were intended to re-energize and reinvigorate East Midtown as a center of really commerce and business for the 21st century. And so our site and building fits into this broader context. You can see One Vanderbilt at the bottom left of the zone, which is already open and preceded the rezoning by a bit, and then JP Morgan's headquarters at 270 Park, which is under construction right now, and many other planned projects in the future. On the next slide, you can see, just to touch on the history, these developments and the rezoning are really a continuation of the legacy of Terminal City, and that was the idea that Grand Central would be a catalyst for density and growth in East Midtown and really utilize the transit infrastructure and network to bring people into Manhattan's premier business district. That transit network, as you can see on the next slide, it really informs our approach in many ways to this project. You can see on the bottom right corner of each of these images is our site, and it really serves as an extension of the terminal. It's got important transit connections that run from Grand Central through the building down into the subway and the surrounding streets. I want to just highlight on this slide in particular that the Lexington Avenue line and the Metro North loop tracks, which allow trains to turn around, both bisect our site. And that's infrastructure that really limits touchdown points for the tower. But you'll see how this informs our engineering and design approach, and we also took it as a real opportunity as we were approaching the site. So looking at 42nd Street today, it's probably hard to find a location that has more untapped potential than this site. I think we all know how we got here, but just briefly, in 1980, Donald Trump reimagined, I guess we could say, the Commodore Hotel and gave us the current Grand Hyatt. The design, as you can see on the next slide as well, is imposing, it's foreboding, it sits on the lot line, it cantilevers over 42nd Street, adding to that feeling of congestion, and it obscures views of Grand Central and really has no relation to the balance of other landmarks surrounding the site. On Lexington Avenue, and then at the viaduct level, you can also see similar effects. Lexington in particular has this narrow congested sidewalk, this retail that's very uninviting. And then up at the viaduct level, it's really an exclusively cars only zone. That relationship does extend to the interior as well. The building poses challenges to pedestrian circulation. You can see on the next slide, the interiors here along the 42nd Street passage. And this is that really famously congested entrance. If you've ever taken the 456 train, you know to get to the subway mezzanine, this is a really terrible choke point. That entrance sits on the Grand Hyatt property. And so there's a real opportunity as we undertake this project to fix some of these interior issues as well. In short, looking at the building today, you know, there are a lot of challenges, but there also is a lot of opportunity. So our proposed project is the demolition of the current hotel and the construction of a new mixed-use tower. The overall program is 2.2 million zoning square feet. That's comprised of just under 2 million square feet of office space spread across 4 tiers, and then a 500-key hotel at the top of the building. There's a small amount of retail, much of which is controlled by the MTA, much of which is interior, given how much of the site is turned over to the public realm and transit improvements. We think, you know, working with our team, we very thoughtfully approach the engineering, design, materiality, and many other details of this project. This is a really important corner in East Midtown, and we think we've designed a building that can really stand in its rightful place as a contemporary building at this location. It's also a project that embraces the vision and intent of East Midtown and that legacy of Terminal City. It does that through the delivery of public spaces that you'll see here, the transit upgrades, and then, of course, the construction of a modern hotel and office building that meets the needs of a 21st century workforce. Suffice it to say, this is an important project, not just for TF Cornerstone and RXR, but we think for the city as well. It's a project that can help signal New York's resilience, its rebound. Just as we start to see the green shoots of spring, it's nice to be here on the first work day as spring started, and hopefully some light at the end of the tunnel as we hopefully near the end of this pandemic. So I'd like to turn it over to Chris Cooper from SOM and Isabel Castilla from James Corner to walk you through our presentation. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Jeff. So, you know, as Jeff points out, our site, our specific site, enables very specific and meaningful opportunities to enhance the daily commuter experience for thousands. As seen here, the red outline represents the current footprint of the Grand Hyatt. And within that footprint is the Lexington Passage and also 3 stair connections down to the subway. And at the root, really, of our proposal, we're facilitating a much more fluid connection from commuter rail to subway. And in this drawing, you can see great improvements to Lexington Passage, to the stairs, going down to the subway, and quite significantly, a new transit hall. And that transit hall decongests the 42nd Street passage and provides a much more natural connection and brings turnstiles up from below grade to street level. As we step down to the mezzanine level, you can see that the removal of the turnstiles directly adjacent to stairs and escalators are going to dramatically open up the congested space. And then when we remove the Grand Hyatt structure above, we also remove a network of transfer girders that block the flow of the mezzanine today. And so the result will really be a transformation of the currently challenged warren of circulation into a much more open mezzanine level. And then from that open mezzanine level, we're creating two critical below-grade connections. One directly to the existing platforms for the Metro North Railroad, and a further connection to the shortly arriving Long Island Railroad East Side access. And in this view of the transit hall, you can see that we're making these connections seamless to the current Grand Central Terminal experience, extending the materials, locking into the formal planning of the terminal, providing generous daylit space, and even visual connection from the corridor system up to Grand Central Terminal for much clearer orientation and even delight. So these improvements are really about a holistic approach to the terminal block. We're providing almost 50% of the street level to public realm. And they're really effective and they're possible because of our cojoined relationship to the terminal and our direct relationship to the infrastructure below the site. But that opportunity, of course, also suggests a challenge. And the active platforms and rails, as Jeff pointed out, are directly below our site. And so we are quite literally threading a needle with the structure through those existing platforms. And so highlighted in red here are points that we can bring structure from above down below. So we think that that challenge might also bring opportunity, and we'll share that with you when we look above grade. So the direct relationship to the infrastructure, the direct relationship to Grand Central Terminal offers all these great enhancements, but it also is meaningful in other ways beyond the transit improvements. We recognize certainly the importance of building a new building in such proximity to a beloved New York City landmark. And this site is unique also in that it's not just adjacent to Grand Central Terminal, but it's entirely surrounded by New York City landmarks. So we believe really this elevates our project, but also puts great responsibility to build appropriately in this context. So towards a goal of exceptionalism and appropriateness, we've adopted a series of design principles. And the first of those is really embracing symmetry, accepting that with that comes a certain formality and dignity that's resonant with our neighbors. And next, we adopted the classic New York City setback geometry. It addresses the sky exposure plane, but it also creates a great formal relationship to other New York City landmark towers. And it enables access to outdoor space for the users of the building, but perhaps most importantly at the base, we've aligned our first setback with the viaduct level and opening up the opportunity for a true public amenity at street level. And then we've taken that step geometry and draped our structure on the outside of that form. And that draped structure becomes then the expression, relief, and detail for the architecture of the building, and also helps us move beyond another glass tower. And that structural expression that becomes the articulation of the building, then we gather that at the base to hit those points that we talked about, the threading of the needle, really sit into the site and demonstrate the fluid flow of structural forces from top to bottom and create a base of the building. And we also gather that structure at the top to create the expression of a crown. And so we're trying to use the expression of the building and the attributes that we're putting into the building to create an active and dynamic street level experience base, and also an active and engaging crown at the top of the building. So the premise of this really is trying to work within that tripartite approach, classic to New York City skyscrapers, of a base, tower, and crown. The result, we believe, is a new iconic tower for New York City, one that's resonant both with New York City's Art Deco skyscraper history, but also is proudly built today and positioned to endure into the future, and acts as a gateway to the future and evolving Park Avenue corridor. And of course, we recognize at this height, we have a responsibility a civic responsibility, really, to stand proudly on the skyline amongst the other great New York City landmark towers. And that responsibility certainly extends down to the street level experience and how we enhance the street level experience. And so in this elevation, we hope you begin to see this idea of a direct and intentional connection to Grand Central Terminal. And we have extended the materiality and the datum and the public component of the viaduct level onto our site and created a landscape of stone that ties into the viaduct base of Grand Central Terminal, and extended that to the core of the building that relates very directly, we believe, to the scale of the Grand Central Terminal. And then atop that landscape of stone tied into the viaduct, we bring down the structure from above. And as we looked at at a larger scale, that structure gathers at the base and really plugs into the points that we're able to plug in below grade between the subway tracks and platforms. And it creates an expression of the structure plugging into the site, but it also gives us great benefit in that we can taper the building in and create meaningful outdoor space around the building. And where we put those points of inflection and where we put those changes in geometry are aligned directly to the landmarks on either side of us to relate, but also to start to bring a proper articulation at the scale of the street and at the base of the building. And as I said, that tapering allows suddenly public realm at the base of the building. And this is, such a significant attribute of the proposal, is that we're able to create meaningful outdoor spaces fully encircling the building at its base. And we are primarily doing that at the viaduct level, which is also our lobby level, because our elevators also do not penetrate down into the infrastructure below. So we have a new raised level at the level of viaduct, which is the lobby of the building, and adjacent terraces that encircle the perimeter of the building. And that strategy of tapering at the base also allows us to incorporate sidewalk widening and increased entrance depth at each of the entrances to the subway and to the building points. So there's a dramatic improvement to the flow at street level. Reminding ourselves of the existing condition, as Jeff said, there is certainly room for improvement. But it reminds us of the challenge of the street wall condition here and the kind of aggressions of the current building towards the pedestrian experience, but also towards Grand Central Terminal, really blocks or conceals the terminal. And this condition that exists today that certainly has room for improvement is exactly the condition of an as-of-right street wall building that would replace this with a podium built to property line that would, again, add to the congestion of sidewalk and the concealing of Grand Central Terminal. And so that's what we think is so unique about this, is that by tapering in, by peeling in to hit those points of structure, we expose Grand Central Terminal, and we can extend the viaduct level and then invite the public up to that viaduct level. And here that starts to show itself, in that for the first time, we see the east facade of Grand Central Terminal as an active part of the streetscape, and that we are able to see around the building and through the building to the Grand Central Terminal, and really invite the public up to new public spaces. So this is created space that is currently in the footprint of the existing building. The property line is just at the far edge of the bench here on the left. And so we're able, by tapering the building in, we're able to create meaningful outdoor space and bring the public up to see the east facade of Grand Central Terminal, which is just as grand as the south facade. And moving around the building, we have this opportunity to now create meaningful outdoor space, sunlit, mature trees raised above the congestion of the sidewalk and the street level, amongst the great New York City landmarks that surround the site. So I want to talk a little bit about the tectonics of the base and how we arrived here and what our approach is. And diagrammatically, we really have been thinking of this as an extension of the plinth of Grand Central Terminal. As we are co-joined, we continue that, which was very much in line with the historical planning of the terminal. So we extend that materiality in the base and also in our core, which is scaled analogously to the Grand Central Terminal. And then we carve out that stone plinth to allow for the complexity of entrances and access to the subway, to Lexington Passage, to the program of the building, to the hotel and to the office. And also that carve allows us to invite the public up to the viaduct level. And that carved stone plinth coincides with the footing positions for the structure below, and where we are able to actually bring that structure down and plug into the site. And so then that steel structure from above, the expressed tower structure, comes down and lands at these points of connection where the viaduct level touches down to sidewalk level. And so some of the specifics about what that means: we have a steel structure, an expressed steel structure. That steel structure plugs into a concrete base. This is the transition that we have to make from steel structure to foundation footing below. So there is a moment where the steel comes down, it is gathered into a concrete base, and then that sits atop the mega column that we were able to thread through the foundation below. And so our approach has been to clad that in stone and to express the solidity of that base. So we have a steel structure that comes down, plugs into a solid base that sits atop the mega column below. And that coincides with the points of connection for the stairs. And that then we've taken a few steps to try to bring down the scale and texture of the columns with detailing that feels appropriate to a pedestrian experience and to a base of a tower in New York City. And that all comes together in an image like this, where you can see, and I think it's worth pausing here for a moment. You can see the condition which is unique in New York City, this idea of plugging into a raised viaduct level, but the power of inviting the public up directly adjacent to that connection, the opportunity to have this raised public space, and also, in addition to the raised public space, be able to open that up at street level to maximize the pedestrian sidewalk widths. And so all of that is, there is a lot happening in a small site and in a small area, but all that comes together at a heroic moment like this. And then as you move around the building, you start to understand that the complexity of that viaduct level in relation to street entrances, in relation to public space above, and the transfer of the tower down into the base of the building. And this is an area that we are very interested in. I mean, SOM has a legacy of landmark buildings with structural expression, and how one thinks about using the expression of that structure as part of the architecture. And so we've tried to be very intentional with how we are placing this building into the city that is appropriate to New York City. And there are devices that we can that we have looked at and are continuing to look at, like what is that actual connection? Should it be simple steel plate that gathers these points? Should we be more exuberant in our expression of this connection from steel to foundation? Or maybe it is as straightforward as making the stone a different color. We continue to look at these. We believe we found the right balance between the extension of the historic conditions of the site with a modern plug-in of a new building. And so, a few images wander around the building, you see here that relationship, a very direct relationship to the Grand Central Terminal, to the viaduct level, that tying into the site and really bowing down to invite the public up to the viaduct level, and then the insertion of the building plugging into that stone landscape. And then as we move around the building, that connection becomes more clear, of a balance between the extension of the viaduct level, the inviting of the public up to that level, and the insertion of the structure into the city. As we step away, you again start to see that relationship of structure to base and street level activity on multiple levels. And then wrapping around Lexington Avenue, again, you continue to get a greater understanding of the benefit of the viaduct level, invitation of the public up to that viaduct level, but also the active entrances to Grand Central, to the subway, and to the building programs below at street level. And I'll pass this on to Isabel to really walk us through the details of the planning of that raised level. But I think in this image, what we hope starts to become apparent is the celebration of this section of the site, that the pedestrian experience is not just at street level, but it is at viaduct level, it is at sidewalk level, and it's also access to that infrastructure below grade. And that the idea here is to try to bring all that together and tie that into a landscape that ties into the Grand Central Terminal and is the receiver for the great structure that is coming from above.
Great, thank you, Chris. So I will now walk you in detail through the designs of the public open spaces. And to summarize again what Chris just mentioned, we envision the public open spaces to surround the four sides of the building and to be encompassed by a series of three very distinct terraces. We have Chrysler Terrace to the right-hand side of the image overlooking Lexington Avenue, Graybar Terrace to the top side of the image along the north side of the building, and then Grand Central Terrace along the left-hand side or west side of the building. Chrysler and Grand Central terraces sit approximately 30 feet above street level at the same level as the viaduct, and Graybar Terrace sits another 14 feet from the other two terraces. All of them will have ample opportunities for access, starting with two grand stairs at the bottom of the image that will take visitors from 42nd Street up to Chrysler and Grand Central terraces. Chrysler will also have a secondary point of access along the north, connecting the subway entry onto the terrace. And further to the north, we see on a pink box on the top right-hand side will be an elevator that will take visitors from street level to Chrysler Terrace as a first stop and to Graybar Terrace as a second stop. Chrysler Terrace will also connect to Graybar Terrace with a staircase lining its eastern side. And then Graybar Terrace will also connect to Grand Central Terrace through a staircase and elevator. Lastly, Grand Central Terrace will also have an elevator that will take visitors from the viaduct level down to 42nd Street, making all three terraces perfectly interconnected but also accessible. Because these spaces are elevated from street level and surrounded by such iconic elements of architecture of Midtown Manhattan, we envision their programming would be arranged as a series of open space rooms. These rooms will provide visitors a variety of different opportunities, ranging from social seating to seating that's carefully being oriented to highlight key views to landmarks, movable tables and chairs that will provide flexibility for those that seek sun or shade, and also fixed tables that will provide anchors throughout the terraces. In addition to creating a variety of experiences, we also envision the terrace will be activated by a public art circuit composed of rotating temporary art that will be located at key places along the terraces, inviting visitors up and to transient all of the public spaces of the area to ensure there's always a level of new opportunity and interest throughout all seasons. So now I'll walk you through the designs of each one of the terraces, starting with their entry point at 42nd Street, which, as Chris described, is composed of a very large and generous series of twin staircases that will take visitors from 42nd Street up to the terraces. The staircases have been designed to have really ample landings, so as visitors step up, they can take a moment of pause to take in the context as they rise up to the terraces. And the garden spaces of the terraces have also been carefully located to be close to the edge of the space. So again, the notion of seeing these garden spaces above really invites visitors from street level up to the terraces above. Starting with the first terrace, we have the Chrysler Terrace. This terrace is the largest of all of them. It's located along Lexington Avenue. And because of its scale and exposure to a large part of the Midtown context, we envision this one as being a social space that will emphasize or take advantage of the unique views it will have to the Chrysler building. But also because of its scale and positioning within Midtown, a space that will be anchored by a canopy of trees that will provide a sense of shelter for those that visit the terrace and also make the public space quite evident from Lexington beneath. So moving on to the next slide, here we see the layout plan of the terrace with Lexington Avenue to the top side of the image. We see this large tree grove anchoring the space. The tree grove will be interrupted in the center by a reflecting pool that is located in perfect alignment with the center of the Chrysler building, further again emphasizing that unique relationship to the iconic context. Looking at the renderings of the Chrysler terrace, we're going to start walking through it from the southern corner. This is the corner of the terrace as it faces 42nd Street and Lexington Avenue. And here we have carefully curved the railing of the terrace to create a very inviting edge that the public can access by standing on a standing ledge with a very broad top and take in views of this unique visual corridor. Moving further along the north, here we see the high branching tree grove that will anchor and shelter the terrace. interrupted in the center by a tabled water feature in alignment with the Chrysler building. Underneath the tree grove, we'll have a variety of different seating types. In this case, in the background, social seating with benches facing each other inboard and bound by shade gardens. Looking on to the next rendering, this is as if your back was placed to the building lobby, which sits at the same level as the terrace. And here we have the central water feature in alignment with the Chrysler building. The intent is that the water feature will mitigate the noise, the high traffic noise one would get from Lexington Avenue, creating a place of respite and rest, but also that the area surrounding it will be kept quite flexible with movable tables and chairs so the public can adjust depending on daylight and sunlight conditions. Moving further to the north, we have the northernmost end of the Chrysler terrace with the staircase that will connect the subway to the terrace on the right-hand side. And on the left-hand side here, we see balcony seating, where now the benches have been oriented outward, taking advantage of the views down Lexington Avenue and the Chrysler building. The northern end of the terrace will be anchored by a retail space that will hold a cafe, but also will hold the elevators that will connect street level to Chrysler Terrace and Gray Bar Terrace above, which we see on this image having a balcony-like relationship to the Chrysler Terrace. All the way on the left-hand side of the image, then we see the staircase that will take us up to Gray Bar Terrace. Gray Bar is located along the north side of the building, as I mentioned originally, and it is the space that will connect both terraces on either side. So we see it as a dynamic connector that will be activated with a retail space, a concession stand, but also as a space that will be kept quite flexible, so it can become an area that can accommodate large pieces of artwork as well as cultural events. We have located 2 permanent seating areas on either end of the terrace, on the east, on the west, where they benefit from great views to the adjacent iconic context. And then we envision to activate the center of the terrace with a retail pavilion that will operate all year round. Looking at the renderings of this space, this is its easternmost edge overlooking Lexington Avenue and the Chrysler building, but also having that immediate direct visual relationship to the Chrysler Terrace beneath. The center of the space, as I mentioned, will be activated with a retail pavilion that will operate year-round and will offer indoor and outdoor seating as well. The retail pavilion is intended to be quite transparent in its architecture, so it still permits clear views out to the Grand Central building behind, which makes this terrace so iconic. To the east of the pavilion, we will have a fixed large-scale communal table activated by 3 large flowering trees. And to the west of the pavilion, we will have a seating area that will be anchored by permanent seating lining a hedge to the north and by fixed movable seating in the center of the space. The intent with this space is that it can become flexible, so it can accommodate a variety of different programming, ranging from fitness classes during the day to other cultural events later in the afternoon or at night. And that also, because of its flexibility, it can accommodate different types of artwork, whether they are more traditional sculptures or more experiential types of art pieces, such as this one that's suspended from the space above. The last space, or terrace, will be the Grand Central Terrace. As you all know now, this one is located at the same level as the Park Avenue Viaduct, overlooking the eastern facade of the Grand Central building. And it is the smallest of all of the terraces. Therefore, we envision it as being more of an individual space, a place of respite and lingering with smaller scale types of seating. The terrace itself is anchored by 3 skylights that will provide daylight to the transit hall beneath. And we're basically using those skylights as a means to create a rhythm of different seating spaces along the length of the terrace. So moving on to the next slide, we see the plan with a large garden space overlooking 42nd Street. So the notion of the public space can be quite visible from beneath and inviting. A seating grove, a larger plaza in the center, and then a flexible balcony space activated movable seating to the north. Looking at the renderings of the space, this is the view of the area as one is coming up from 42nd Street, looking to the north. We see how we have kept the circulation quite open, so there is a strong interconnectivity between all terraces, and also looking for opportunities to place artwork at key locations that will invite the public through. To the left-hand side of the image, we see a seating area anchored by 2 large canopy trees. This area will have large-scale benches that will face both inboard and outboard, offering the public the possibility to face the Grand Central building or face the interior of the terrace as a social space. Looking at the next slide, here we see the benches as they're oriented in different ways, and the entry to the building lobby behind with a flush plaza that would allow visitors clear views of the Grand Central Building. And then the space to the north, if we move on to the next slide, now our back is to the Gray Bar Terrace staircases. Here we see that northern space activated with movable tables and chairs and lined with a hedge that will screen views of the roadway of the viaduct and really direct them up to the building, ensuring visitors can really take advantage of that unique iconic context surrounding the space. So in summary, we're looking for all the terraces to provide very unique experiences, very different types of social opportunities, all oriented towards the unique views of the context that the elevated spaces will offer, but also seeking to create a unifying design vocabulary with the choice of materials, starting from limestone and bronze, which are very persistent through the context, and very textured shade planting. Lastly, we see how artwork will then add this additional layer or interest to the terraces. So as artwork is changed on a temporary basis, really draws visitors up to this unique space within Midtown. I will let now Jeff make some concluding remarks. If someone can unmute Jeff.
Thank you very much. So obviously we're really excited about this project. We hope that comes through in the presentation, or came through in the presentation. And we've given you a sense of how thoughtful we've tried to be with every aspect of this project. Just to conclude, as I said at the beginning, we really do think this project can be a game changer for Midtown Manhattan. This is a site that today has so much untapped potential. And really, there's an opportunity to contribute to the transit, the broader public realm, and to the recovery of the city. So we're very pleased to be here and to continue our engagement with you and the commission, and are, of course, happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. And just a reminder to everyone, this is committee meeting, so we are not having public testimony. So Signe, if you'd like to take it away.
Sure. Thank you for that very detailed presentation and a lot of the kind of context responses. I'll keep my mouth shut on the architecture, but I do want to commend the team for some of the modifications that have been made to the exterior spaces. I think they're very appropriate, and but in no way diminish the offerings that are provided. And I think it's quite interesting that there is a flexible space. I think it might actually be one of the more quiet spaces that would lend itself to that kind of programming. So I am completely comfortable with the direction that this has evolved.
Okay, I will, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so I just wanted to add, thank you very much as well for the presentation and, its thoroughness. And, I think especially the base, which is really complicated. I grant you that, that the transfer of this structural system to the plinth and viaduct level, and then trying to create that continuity at the same time for pedestrians to circulate. So, I was very fixated on the resolution of the structure in its base at the, what you had shown, the kind of examples of Beinecke and Broadgate and Hancock. And so I'll be interested to see how you resolve that specifically. And I also, I think the first two are great examples. The Hancock just kind of goes into a chunk. But on the terrace that is on the west side of the building, I'm trying to think of the name of the terrace, but I just got a glimpse of that. I don't know what slide it was, but there was a very large plinth exposure. It's actually exposure of the base of the column. So you're articulating that condition where, the thinness, the translation of the viaduct level becomes this thin skirt piece, whatever you want to call it, which I think can be very elegant. So two things, when it comes around, there was so these are the three examples, which I think are great. I mean, the Beinecke is very heroic. So I guess it's in the landscape presentation where you're on that terrace, but you're, yeah, what is that terrace called?
I think this is the Grand Central Terrace that you're referring
The Grand
to,
Central, excuse
on
me,
the
Grand
west
Central,
side,
right, on
Yeah.
the west side. And then there's, if you keep going, there's a kind of place where the plinth, well, let's say the structure exposes itself, where the columns there. So this big gray bar here laying on the ground, what are you gonna, that's just kind of, you know, red, you know, kind of asterisk, you know, seems like what to do there, right? So I'm just kind of interested in how that resolves itself, because you have this, you know, kind of very elegant landscape resolution, and then you have this chunk. Are people supposed to sit on that? You know, what is that piece? That's just, you know, question mark. Maybe it's fine, maybe it's just, you know, it is what it is. So just kind of wondering what's happening there. And then I also wanted to point to this very specific moment where the viaduct, that would be on the facade, we looked at it last time, where it meets, where the viaduct meets your facade, and that point of continuity, kind of contrast of new and old, which I think is great. But just wanted to, you know, it was done so poorly previously. So when you're on the ground, you're looking across the street, and you're looking at the two facades of the viaduct level and your base coming together, you know, obviously there's a big reveal and a control joint, but you know, just I'm, you know, just interested in how that gets articulated. So because that's a really important moment in the project. Thank you. But anyway, you know, I think it's progressing nicely.
Do you want me to respond to either of those points, Lori? Should I pause?
I think these are just kind of elaborations on what our comments were, but the one on the Grand Central Terrace, I just noticed for the first time. So I just wanted to call that out. And maybe that is something you're going to look into. That's all.
So
Okay.
I would just like to add my support to Lori's comments. I think the presentation you guys did today was terrific. I think the building is definitely moving in some terrific positive directions but particularly grateful, by the way, for the views of the building from actual streetscape as opposed to semi-helicopter views. And it's lovely to see that when you actually take people to the street, the building looks pretty damn good. So that's great. And those, I think, are relatively new. And I thank you for providing that, because that's what a lot of people will see. Just one, you know, final sort of support to Lori's comments. The transition from the metal to the base, as you have articulated so well, is the critical moment of this building from an experiential point of view. And I think it's unbelievably tough structurally. We all understand that. But it's great to see that you are exploring a variety of alternatives on how to make that as, you know, positive as it possibly can, and looking at some tremendous examples from other buildings as sort of guidance to that transition, because everyone will see it, everyone will be excited to see it. It's an amazing piece of design, but the ultimate sort of finalization of the plans for that are going to be a lot of what I think some of us are going to look at and take account of. So keep working on those if you can. But I think, again, as Lori and Cindy said, it's headed in a great direction. The outdoor public spaces are terrific. The opening up of the Grand Central Terminal to the street, the elevated spaces are great. And the elimination of the Commodore Hotel is a major blessing in and of itself. So it has all the right elements. We're looking forward to the future.
Yeah, and I guess we shouldn't neglect to say, even though it's not really our purview, that the ways in which this building will facilitate circulation and access below grade is obviously hugely important.
Terrific. I agree.
So we hope that or I hope that privately owned public space that you're giving us can be as open and as accessible as much of the year and much of the day as possible. And I know that's also not in your purview, but I think, that's what these spaces were meant for. They're breathing spaces in the city. So, you're designing it as a gift to the city that you kind of have to give, but it's a really beautiful gift. So let's hope they can get to use it all the time. Thank you.
I just had a comment, actually. I'm looking at page 17 in the presentation. And, I think that's a great rendering that demonstrates how this new space, kind of continue the sort of language of Grand Central, with the signage. I actually go through this. I used to go through the space before the pandemic weekly to use Metro North. So for me, this is totally welcome to see. I'm sure it'll be great benefit for everyone using that. And I think in this rendering, there's a good example of how, the kind of agency signage or branding of Metro North and I guess signage or look of Grand Central go together well. I did have a question about page 54. So I think this is also a good rendering that, as a kind of thing to look at or study. I think, you have the kind of branding for the hotel, the signage for the subway system, and then the signage for Lexington Passage. And, for me, I usually enter through the 42nd Street entrance that we're just looking at, but I also sometimes enter here. And, I always get the sense that, like, okay, this is a passageway through this, the existing hotel, but, and I'm in this passageway, I feel like I'm in Grand Central. So I think my question here is when you're looking at this kind of like, interface, with the building, is it clear that like this Lexington Passage, are you in, once you enter through those doors, are you in Grand Central, or are you, part of this public-private space, or are you, part of the kind of building? That's kind of more of an open-ended question. And I'd be curious, like, what your response is or how you're thinking about that. But that was just one thing that I wanted to notice or highlight.
Grace or Carrie, do you want us to, I'm happy to provide a little context on the Lex Passage, in particular on the Lexington side, because we didn't really touch on that improvement. So I'm happy to do that.
Sure, and I also assume that you'll be developing signage as the project evolves, and also, I know that we had talked about signage encouraging people to go to the second floor, as it's.
Yeah, we definitely will be very focused on developing the signage, and then just very briefly on the Lex Passage, what the project will actually do is we'll be increasing the ceiling heights. I think almost doubling the ceiling heights and entrance into Lex Passage, so it'll be a 20-foot high ceiling. So we're really introducing both light and air into that passage, as well as making it more prominent on the Lexington Avenue side. And obviously signage will be a big part of that as well.
And, I think just looking, I know this is a placeholder example, but the kind of language here is, sort of maybe I guess like language of a retail space, potentially, there's a shop I might see, but should this signage here indicate that you're entering Grand Central, or, is it, should it be more kind of highlighted as like the Lexington Passage as its own entity? Just curious what your thoughts are on that too.
Yeah, I think that it's a good point and something that we'll continue to look at here as we're developing the signage plan, for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Just one, hi. A couple of people now actually use the words POPs, publicly owned private space, and we all know about the examples, good and bad, of that. This is, of course, a remarkable set of public spaces by many criteria. And maybe this is not exactly in your purview at this point, but may I ask, will the public space as defined encompass all of the terraces, and will that be reviewed in some way or conform to any of the regulations of city planning in regard to public space? I say that carefully because, you know, you've done a very wonderful creative thing here, and I think it's extremely unusual, but I'm taking the other side of it, of just to what the regulations, how that will evolve. And I guess it's connected with what some of what Manuel and others have said about signage, but just in general, what Lori talked about of enforcement and so on. Is that something that you will be developing with the city planning and possibly the community boards and others in the neighborhood?
That's exactly right. We've been working now for, I think, over a year with city planning on these spaces as well, and they'll all be governed by, you know, the special permit that will be in place to deliver these public spaces. So city planning will have a hand in all of those regulations.
Okay, thanks.
And so the project will be going through ULURP, and after it goes through community board reviews, it'll come back to the Public Design Commission, and we'll have it, at that point, we'll review it at a preliminary level and have a public hearing.
Is there a time frame for that? I guess, is it in ULURP now, and then am I correct? And then it moves ahead. Just want to get a sense of the timing to come back.
We're not quite in ULURP yet. We expect later this spring we'll be certifying.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
So if there are no further comments, we thank you very much for your time today in this very thorough presentation, and all the best in ULURP.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you all.
And for anyone who is watching or in the meeting or watching on YouTube, we are still in the committee meeting, so we are not taking public testimony and at this point, but we will start the public hearing soon. And if you want to give testimony on any of either of the two projects on the public hearing, please, you can find the sign-in form and instructions in the video description below the video on YouTube, and also in the agenda on our website.
So now we'll move on to hear a combined presentation of the Landscape Terrace and Earth Science Garden exhibit at the Brooklyn Children's Museum. Just want to remind everybody that the Landscape Terrace is on today's consent agenda for a vote, not the not the exhibit, the Earth Science exhibit that we're seeing here. So team, you please begin.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Wilchfort. I'm the president of Brooklyn Children's Museum. Thank you so much for hearing a little bit about our two projects here today. And I'm just gonna offer two pieces of context for the presentation that the designers are about to give. The first is that this project is really a core piece of Brooklyn Children's Museum's 6-year strategic plan. And the reason for that is because it opens 20,000 square feet of public space in the museum, allowing us to put in a kind of a large outdoor exhibit. So we haven't had an outdoor space. We have our roof terrace, but we haven't had an outdoor exhibit space in the past. And it allows us to do sort of 3 programmatic things. One is create a gross motor exhibit. We don't have a gross motor play area. Most of the exhibits in the museum are sort of smaller, fine motor focused exhibits on collections. It allows us to create a major science exhibit, which has been an important aspiration for us. There is no science museum, as I think you all know, in Brooklyn. And Brooklyn is, you know, the 4th largest city, if it were its own city, in the country, and there is no science museum. So we have always aspired to have more science exhibitions for children. And then the third piece is that we're creating a space that appeals to older children. The idea is to create a space that is an exhibit for children in the 5 to 12 age range. Most of our exhibits are exhibits in the 2 to 8-year-old age range. So we're creating a space that ages up a little bit. The other piece of context I want to give you is about the funding for these two projects. The first project, as I think you know, is funded by the City of New York, through the Department of Cultural Affairs, the New York City Council, and the Brooklyn Borough President's Office. The second project is a $4.5 million exhibits project, and roughly $2 million has been raised from the state of New York. We are in the process of fundraising for the remaining $2.5 million from both public and private sources, not probably from the City of New York, but perhaps additional state and federal funding, and from foundation and corporate sources. But the reason I give that piece of context is to kind of explain why these two projects are separate. The funding for these two projects has to be kept very, very separate, and the funds cannot commingle in any way. And because of that, that's why you're seeing these two projects as two distinct phases in a single space and not as a single project. We've taken a lot of steps to ensure design integration, including for project 2. We've hired the same architect, Gans & Company, that is working on the first project. But I think that may be a helpful piece of information to understand why these have to be kept separate. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Deborah Gans to talk a little bit more about project 1.
Hi, Stephanie. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. Grace, I'm not controlling it's not advancing. Is it on full screen PDF? It's not advancing. Oh, there it goes. Here, let me see. Can I move it? I'm not, let's see. I don't seem to be able to move the slides, the images.
Sorry about that. I went to the bathroom. Okay,
Oh, it's not.
let me try and restart this share.
Right, yeah. I think we had this when we practiced, we had this issue too.
Okay.
Let's see. I'm gonna let's see. Nope.
Okay, well, why don't I advance it for you? And
okay. So can you go back just can you let me, oh, I wonder.
Here, now it says
Okay,
you're controlling my screen. Why don't you try again?
Huh.
Try your mouse or try the keyboard keys or.
I am
Okay.
what is this? Nope.
Okay, well, why don't I just do it for you, and I can
Okay,
control it for the rest
so
of the time.
you'll excuse, everyone will excuse my nexts. So, okay, so this is good. We'll start here. So our site is the green L at the rear of the yellow museum that completes the square. And as Stephanie said, it hasn't been an exhibit space, but it did provide public programs as well as a garden from the late 1970s when the first phase of the museum was opened until 2013 when it was closed because it was unsafe, and it's been closed since then. Could I have the next, please? Thank you. Our primary charge is to address the life safety conditions posed by the failing retaining structure, which you see here, and you should know that it continues to fail every day to this day. Our second task, and you can keep it here, thanks, is to improve this courtyard by expanding its accessible public space within a sustainable environment that will support the museum's earth science exhibits. And this is a great place to stop. Thanks. Because it's a difficult technical task, which I think you can see in the slide, because not only is it 15 feet below ground, but it's really quite narrow, which is registered in the historic design you see here, because there are a lot of narrow little paths and a lot of little steps opening onto smaller terraces. And we wanted to address that in our new design. So the next, please, and we can stay here for a bit. So with our collaborator from the beginning, we've collaborated with Nancy Owen's studio. We use the landscape itself as the retaining structure. We use stabilized planted slopes as our primary structural means, and they of course also provide water management. You see here how those slopes are then traversed by accessible paths and ramps that open onto terraces. And those terraces are sometimes shaped and protected by retaining walls, which are carved into the slope. So this diagram shows in yellow, the gathering and program areas, in green, activity and installation places, as well as garden resting and seating areas in brown, that together are going to provide the museum with a very rich armature for their program vision. Could I have the next one, please? Thanks. So this is a diagram of the primary accessible loop, circulation loop, which is in green, so that all the major exhibits are extensions of or part of this accessible loop, and they're also accessible. Then what we've done is across the garden, we've also then connected them through sight lines. So you'll see one of the angular niches on the bottom is connected to one on the top. And then for example, the central plaza, the central terrace looks back and is connected to the organizing geometry of the interior museum along the ramp. So we've tried to make a lot of connections like that. The last thing, could you go back for 1 second? So I just want to make one other point, which is you see the yellow areas are the accessory stairs that by code need to lead to public ways. And now could I have the next one? But what we've tried to do is then also incorporate them into a sequence of minor, more intimate, smaller circuits that are more intimately engaged in the landscape and provide what Stephanie called a lot of gross motor activities, for the kids to run up and down the slopes. So for example, the brown lines are shortcuts, so they can go off a green circuit, up a brown shortcut and around and about. You want to go to the next one? Yeah, because I think this is a very good way to see how this all works together in relationship. All these paths and places work together in relationship to the slope. I should say that in this whole process, we spent a lot of time talking to Robin Moore, who was our consultant. He's a child's garden expert who brought us Teardrop Park and worked on that, as well as many other beloved spaces. But the thing that I want to show here is also the different characters of the space, meaning on the south, which is the right, it's wider, gentler, it sponsors a path rather than a ramp that opens onto spaces to either side of it, while on the north side, which is on the left, it's much narrower. It is traversed by a windy ramp that opens onto what we call the North Slope climbing, the moraine. And then could you go back 1 second, Grace? Thank you so much. So on the central terrace, the other thing I want to bring your attention to is it looks down on the crevasse, and the crevasse is an important feature because for kids who can't scramble up slopes, it's a universally accessible way to experience the dramatic section of the garden, and also a way for all the kids to really enter into a cut into the earth. And so then the next is slide just next shows how we've controlled the retaining structures. Most of them are less than 30 inches in height, unless they're serving as an armature for one of these geological features. And then the next, these are all the rails and fences and guards that protect the kids from some of the slopes and the slope plantings from the kids. And we've tried to integrate them with things like the stone paths, so we don't have a lot of arbitrary fences in the landscape. They've been integrated into the circulation. And so then the next several slides, which Grace can just flip us through, are views that show how all these elements work together to do two things, which is to create an integrated retaining structure, but also simultaneously an armature for the earth science garden, which is geological and also a matter of the flora and the fauna. And if you go to the next slide, Grace, I'm going to have Nancy Owens speak to the flora for a minute.
Hi, Nancy Owens, and thank you, Deborah. So just go back to the previous slide. I just wanted to say that we use the planting to further articulate the garden spaces and program areas where the plants masses create volume and canopies, and also create a hierarchy of scale with the trees and the understory and the ground covers. Next, we use the plants to also create a sense of enclosure for this earth science universe. Screening out the unsightly areas such as the handball chain link fence and some of the service areas, while still allowing a visual connection between the museum garden and Brower Park. We have used all natives here, pretty much, reflecting the diversity of New York State's different plant communities, which also support the museum's educational science programming. And they're also integral to slope stabilization. The plant species are low maintenance, primarily deciduous with some evergreen shrubs, and the planting design provides seasonal color and interest. Thank you.
Thanks, Nancy.
So now Jonathan Goldstein will speak a little bit about the exhibit. Let me try and transfer all sorts of Zoom forms. Transfer control to Jonathan. Okay, it says it's okay. You should have control.
Yeah.
All right.
Hi, everyone. So it's my excellent job to be able to bring you what folks will be doing in this beautiful garden. So I'm the exhibit designer. And in the interest of time, and as we get closer and closer to lunch, I will just breeze through each of these exhibit areas, really holding back some of the pedagogical and philosophical decision-making that went into each of these things. Certainly, if you have questions about it, we can talk about that at the end. So this is a 3D view of the exhibit concepts situated within this glorious park design. Here are ADA accessible and compliant pathways that's marked in the lime green color. This path also includes 3 different access points within the vertical climbing structure situated down here on the left side of your screen, which is a pretty rare thing for children's museums to have that many access points within a vertical climber. And it really reflects our desire to make access significant and not simply perfunctory. Next, we're looking at how the exhibit components are laid out in an activity gradient in order to encourage self-regulation. On the left-hand side, we have our big body, exuberant, sweaty, rambunctious play exhibits. And then on the right-hand side of your screen, we have quieter, calmer areas of refuge and respite. Next, we're going to look at each component, beginning with the impressively titled 4.6 billion year walk. This is an annotated walkway extending from the building to the geological wall of time. The length of each of the path segments corresponds and is proportional to the lengths of time that they represent. Next, we're looking at the fern grove. The fern grove is an artistic interpretation of prehistoric megaflora, which may have existed in the Brooklyn area during the last ice age. In the fern grove, you can snuggle and gently be swinging in hammock chairs. And when the wind blows, several wind turbines will spin, producing gentle, soothing musical tones. As the sun tracks across the sky, prismatic lenses will cast rainbows all around you. The next exhibit is the quarry garden. And there are three types of rock. There's sedimentary, igneous, and metamorphic. And in the quarry garden, guests can feed a collected mixture of those rocks into a mechanical device, which sorts them into their three distinctive types. Here's a more detailed view of that rock sorter, which is stylized to look like this mysterious, rare treasure, this ancient heirloom. The next two exhibits are the traverse climb and the stone harp. And you could think of the traverse climb like an extra wide balance beam that shares this wall that features adaptive handholds, easy to grab adaptive handholds. This component's intended for our youngest climbers, as well as simply being a more accessible play invitation. At the top of this staircase, there is what looks like an otherwise mute or inert stone obelisk. But upon closer inspection, when you use the mallet, you know that the stone harp plays these beautiful, almost mysterious musical tones. The next exhibit is the Big Melt, which features 4 of Brooklyn's most famous Ice Age megafauna. Individual water geysers are situated safely within each sculpture, allowing guests to pressurize and launch the geysers skyward. The amount of water is actually pretty small, but the effect is impressive. Fogging water nozzles complete the dramatic setting, wrapping guests and the sculptures in a veil of mist. Moving on to the crevasse that Deborah was talking about, where we have the magma core. The magma core is a whimsical interpretation of the Earth's core. Here, guests may grab pebbles situated at the base of the core and drop them through a perforated sculpture. As the pebbles fall, they cascade through internal steel pins, which then result in musical notes. As an added feature, at the sculpture's base, guests can rake and broom the pebble bed. This is a super low-tech feature that we've had great success with on past projects. Now we're moving on to the stone tower. This is an inhabitable climbing structure, and I say inhabitable because unlike a climbing wall, guests are climbing safely within the interior of this structure. They're not strapped in with a rope or on belay. And guests climb through the structure by moving from platform to platform, such that the farthest one could fall would be a very safe 28 inches, give or take. Our climbing structure is organized as a series of 7 stacked themed spaces or galleries. Conceptually, our climbing structure is like a geode. We have a hard, crunchy, monotonous, megalithic exterior structure, but then this saturated, rich, vibrant color interior. Here's how that geode concept was applied to an initial model of the climber. This is an initial circulation diagram showing points of access and circulation paths through the structure. An initial site section through that model, showing access at garden level, at the terrace level, and then at a roof access. These are just some initial interior sketches, just sussing out that those gallery concepts. At the bottom of the climber, we're planning to have an ADA accessible community slide. I'm drawing it right now as a steel slide, but I actually think we could develop this into an extra wide roller slide to make it even more accessible. And here's another exterior concept sketch. We're going to be developing all of these concepts, the climber especially, with much greater level of detail in the next design phase. The next exhibit is the moraine, as Deborah mentioned, which, as you may remember, a moraine is a huge pile of rocks that was pushed and left behind as the Ice Age glaciers receded. To a large extent, as many of you know, Brooklyn sits along the terminal moraine of that last Ice Age. So here's an overview of that component sitting adjacent to our climber, where there are large landscape boulders and repurposed concrete drainage pipes that allow guests to scramble up the hillside. Here's another view of that exhibit. And lastly, we have the wall of geologic time running along the east of the garden. And what we have essentially is a beautiful graphic timeline that demonstrates the last 650 million years of life on Earth. Lastly, in an effort to make some tacit connection between distance and time, we have two separate speaking tubes, a short one and one that's 3 times as long. Sound travels faster through the short one than it does through the longer one, so the overall acoustic effect will be similar to that of an echo. That's all the major exhibit components within the garden, and the next steps really are to take a closer look at each one and now decide exactly how it's built and how it will really work. And here's a nice last shot of the entire garden with all the components in context. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Jonathan, I actually felt like I was in the garden as you described those experiences. That was really beautiful. I guess when we were looking at the plan, you did mention that this is for slightly older kids, but I would still imagine that those children are accompanied by an adult to the museum. And I just wondered, it seemed to me that the amount of seating that had been there previously has been reduced. Is that, am I reading that correctly or not?
Who can answer that question? Jonathan, I think you're unmuted, or?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I think there's loads of seating within each exhibit area between the low walls that are positioned and proportioned not only to retain earth, but also to allow folks to sit. There's also a lot of seating up in the big melt area with that amphitheater seating along the south edge. There's seating that we plan on having all along the plaza edge between the plaza and the building. That would allow for some movable seating for folks to adjust where they need to be. Seating along the area with the fern grove. So I think within all of the available spaces and maintaining ADA accessible pathways, I think there's still a fair amount. Deborah, did I miss anything?
No, and there's also there are kind of boulders to sit on along the paths as well, you know, and so we're trying to also kind of integrate some more natural seating as you move through the space as well. And the curbs, as you said, a lot of the curbs are wide so that you can sit on them in relationship to the exhibits.
So I have one more question, which I think is sort of a philosophical one. I mean, again, I think these are so exciting that I almost don't want. I want it to be all kids. I kind of want the adults to just go down there and hang out on those chairs and leave the kids alone. But what philosophically, and this is probably a question for the museum as well, I guess I would say, is there any adult interpretation, or is this really something that the age group that you're targeting can experience without any adult, I dare say, intervention?
I'll just give a couple of pieces of context for that, and then I think Jonathan could probably speak to that as well. The whole museum is intended to be child-directed. So we've aspired throughout the museum to create a space where children are leading and the adults are following, and there does not need to be a significant amount of adult interpretation. I think in this space, there may be some interpretation that would need to be done for younger children, but really our goal is that this space is as self-directed as our other spaces. And that is part of I didn't make that up. 120 years ago, Anna Billings Gallup, who is our first executive director, set that as the philosophy of the museum, and it has remained so. The other thing I just would say, and Jonathan, you can talk a little about this, is that this is not intended to be a didactic area. We are intending that children get a little bit of exposure to earth science, see some of the beauty and the glory and the excitement and the fascination of earth science, but that they really are not, that some of the very, very specific concepts, this is not a space where you would learn some of those specific concepts. It's really more about exposure. And in that sense, a teacher could come through here and interpret these spaces in a more didactic way. And I think that is very much an open possibility. But a parent, I think what we hope to see is that parents would sort of let their kids free range a little bit in this space, and do a little bit of that safe, risky play that we know is so important for formative experiences. Jonathan, you have anything?
Stephanie, that was excellent. I would have given a much more designerly esoteric answer than that. I think you're spot on. Yeah, these are meant to be invitations for inquiry. They are not meant to be like a didactic exhibit that you would see at a natural history museum. These are meant to be less about a child leaving this space and being an expert on the Jurassic period, more than a child seeing that they live in a universe that is knowable, that they live in a universe that has some level of intelligibility and organization to it, and that they live in a universe that's beautiful. And when and if we can do that, then I think a child becomes a lifelong seeker of information, a lifelong curiosity seeker. And that's what we're really after, that these are these invitations for curiosity.
Excellent. Yes, because I'm all about people. I just think about this as sort of a beehive of children, and I want the adults to just get out of the way here. So, that's perfect. Thank you so much. Any other commissioners? Want to weigh in?
I have one comment.
Okay.
I agree with everything that's been said. It's an extraordinarily exciting and moving and dense landscape that will reward lots of exploration. And, I'm looking forward to visiting. I just wonder if you'd considered, the one thing that I was thinking for older children, or even really anywhere in that spectrum from 5 to 12, is a place where they can help create something, like a sort of unfinished. There's a kind of finished quality to this landscape that is makes it exciting, especially in the way that we're talking about it now, but to lots of work that's been done about kind of the formative experience of loose parts and creation. And I know you have some of that within the building right now. I just wonder if there's an area where your kind of creative reign is unprogrammed. I think that it would, to me, there are certain children, maybe not all, but like rather than receiving the experience, maybe they can help create it. But overall, it's like, I can't wait.
Deborah, that's I find that an astute observation. We're walking a fine line when you're especially in an outdoor space between loose parts, open-ended play, and operationally sustainable models, right? So being able to reset an exhibit at a children's museum can be really, really challenging in a loose parts scenario. So we're always trying to find that what's that right balance between offering those sorts of elements in an exhibit and making it where you don't have to have 10 staff members that are rolling through this thing. There are some loose parts play that I probably downplayed in my presentation in the quarry garden area, but I think you're spot on. I think we need to find other areas where that can find its way back into the exhibit plan.
Thank you. And I mean, I just want to acknowledge, I know that's the hardest thing. And, you know, if it can be done, I think for some children, it would be deeply meaningful.
I totally agree.
I had a quick question about the timing, because when it was introduced, first of all, I want to say it's a great, it's a very ambitious project and very exciting. So I'm also very excited to see this happen. And especially in these times that we're in, I mean, we need it now, right? But you mentioned that it's two projects, that there's the kind of infrastructure, kind of stabilizing all of that, and then the exhibit. Is there any plan to open it before the exhibit, or are they tied together in terms of their ETA when they are completed?
Lori, that's a great question. So here's what we're seeking to do right now. The project one will create a finished space that can be opened even if the exhibits are not installed. It can be opened as an outdoor play area. It can be opened as a space of sort of outdoor respite. It can be opened as a gathering area for school groups and families. If for some reason, and look, we're looking to raise $2.5 million. It's not a huge amount of money, and I really believe that we can do it. But if for some reason the project were delayed, either for funding reasons or for other structural reasons, we would open the space even without the exhibits. Our aspiration is to install the exhibits immediately after the space is completed, so that we can open it as one sort of big, beautiful exhibit. But it is not out of the question that we would open it in 2 phases.
Thank you.
Great.
Any other comments from commissioners? If not,
I just wanted to say it's an exciting project, and just like the rest of the commissioners, I'm really excited to see it to fruition.
So thank you. That was on that note, Mary, thank you. We really appreciate this, and a reminder that we'll be voting momentarily on the landscape on the consent agenda.
And so, Signe, we're running a little behind. We were going to take a break. I'm wondering if commissioners want a 5-minute break before we begin the public meeting.
I personally could use one, yes.
Okay. Okay. We'll begin in 5 minutes, approximately. If you're watching on YouTube right now, we are taking a momentary break before beginning the public meeting. And we will begin with a vote on the consent agenda, and then we have 2 public hearing items. If you would like to give testimony on one of the 2 projects listed on the public hearing, that would be the Canal Street Triangle and Sankofa Park. Please sign in so we know to call your name. And you can do that by following the directions that are either on the agenda or in the YouTube video description. So below the YouTube video, you'll find a link to instructions on how to join and a link to the sign-in form. Thanks.
Yeah, here I come.
Okay, do we have our commissioners here? Are we all ready to, just want to make sure everyone had a chance to get back to their screens. Signe, just so you know, Ken Seth had to leave. And I think Phil
Phil had to leave too.
That was a little unclear.
Yeah.
So.
And so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and myself, 9 commissioners. Is Meryl on?
Meryl was not able to join. She is not joined.
1, 2. 8. So we have a quorum, assuming.
I don't think Phil is, I think we may have to log Phil off.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we should just do that. And he can log back on if he's available.
Okay. Then Signy, I think we can go ahead and begin and with the consent agenda vote.
Okay. So we're just on the beginning of good afternoon, everyone. We are now going to begin with the public meeting. I'll do a roll call to confirm commissioner attendance. When I call your name, please say here. Lori Hawkinson.
Here.
Deborah Martin.
Here.
Manuel Miranda.
Here.
Richard Moore.
Here.
Susan Morgenthau.
Here.
Ethel Sheffer.
Here.
Mary Valverde.
Here.
Okay, thank you. So we will now vote on consent agenda items number 27689 to 27718. Staff has noted Commissioner Aaron's recusal on item 27713, Commissioner Morgenthau's recusal on item number 27696, Commissioner Sheffer's recusal on item 27711 and 27712, and my recusal on item 27699. Are there any other recusals that have not been noted? Carrie, you would alert me, I assume.
Yes.
Okay, so then let the record show there are no further recusals. I will now call for a vote. Commissioners, when I call your name, please state your vote for the consent agenda. You may approve or reject all, or you may reject or abstain from individual projects. Lori.
Approve.
That's approve all, right?
Approve all.
Deborah.
Approve all.
Manuel.
Approve all.
Richard.
Approve all.
Susan.
Approve all.
Ethel.
Approve all.
Mary.
Approve all.
And myself, approve all. So the consent agenda is approved. So we are now moving on to the public hearing for item 27719, reconstruction of Canal Street Triangle as part of the Gateways to Chinatown program. Per standard procedure, the applicants will give their presentation, then public testimony will be heard, and then we can ask questions, deliberate, and we will be voting on this.
Okay, before we begin, Deborah, we're going to put you in the waiting room, or try to, since Jenna, can you do that?
I can try. If I remove you completely, Deborah, just rejoin and we won't let you back into the main meeting.
I'll give you a heads up when it's about time. And we'll unmute you, Nick. Let me unmute you. Can somebody unmute Nick? And Neil.
Okay. Good afternoon, commissioners. My name is Nick Petnati. Sorry, are we okay to start? All good?
Yeah, thank you.
Great. Good afternoon, commissioners. My name is Nick Petnati from the New York City Department of Transportation. I'm joined by my colleagues Neil and Karin, also from DOT. And we're here today to present to you the preliminary design for our Canal Street Triangle as part of the Gateways to Chinatown program. So just as a quick reminder, we're focused today on the Canal Street Triangle as part of the overall effort for Gateways to Chinatown. There are a number of other gateways that we continue to look at and work with the community on further designs of, but we're going to focus today on Canal Street. So just for quick orientation, we are looking at this space that's highlighted in red that's bounded by Baxter Street, Walker Street, and Canal Street. Again, here's an existing conditions photo just to give everybody a quick reminder of what the site looks like. This is technically pre-pandemic, but it hasn't changed much since. Managed to get out there in January on a very, very cold day with the Parks Department, and still pretty much looks like you're seeing here. We had last spoken with the commission in December at the December hearing at a conceptual level. You may recall we presented 3 conceptual options at that time and really heard from the commission that the option 2, what we were calling the BOSC option, was the most successful and the preferred. So we've really tried to run with that design and further it. As well as take it through community reviews and quite a lot of stakeholder engagement. These are some of the key areas that we focused on. And now I'll get into where we're at currently. And so you can see again, here is the existing conditions plan on the left, as well as our latest plan on the right. And we'll zoom in now just to go through the elements. I'll walk through this from sort of the narrow side of the triangle to the wider side of the triangle. Again, the really big focus here was on preserving the existing ginkgo trees on site. I think Signe made the comment, these were one of the iconic pieces along Canal Street, and they really do speak for themselves. So we've really tried to focus on making sure that those can thrive and succeed. A number of the comments that we've heard from stakeholders is really wanting a buffer from Canal Street. Obviously, it's a very busy roadway, so we've continued to refine that buffer along the edge. We've added 2 additional ginkgo trees here to fill out that BOSC. And then in the existing ginkgo trees, we're looking at creating smaller circular tree pits at 3-foot diameter with silvacells below permeable pavement surface. And you'll see what those details look like a little bit later in the presentation. But the goal is really to make sure that those trees have as robust a growing environment as possible, while still allowing for pedestrian circulation through and amongst them. We think this is really one of the key design moves in order to facilitate that east-west circulation through the space. Then we get to the wider part of the triangle. Again, this is really more of the active side of it, where we imagine more of the sort of tour groups and smaller group gatherings, performances that would be taking place. This again still allows for that circulation to move through the space. On the Walker Street side, we have the semicircular planting bed with a cherry tree and a proposed city bench. We are looking at doing a custom powder coat for the city bench to keep it in line with sort of the overall sort of red furnishing palette that you'll see. And then on the Canal Street side, we have another wider planted area with an additional cherry tree to sort of form this gateway space that you can walk through. And then a digital information kiosk is sort of the 21st century version of the existing kiosk that's on site. And I think this is really something we'll spend more time in the presentation going through the details, but this was really in response to a lot of the comments that we heard, not only from the commission, but also from the community and a lot of the stakeholders that we have been engaged with, particularly some of the cultural and nonprofit institutions, thinking about, and I think Commissioner Armstead, who's not here, but how do we create an access point for the community and really make it a dynamic space that can support and amplify the voices of this neighborhood, and again, really make it something that is truly interactive. And so again, we'll get into a little bit more of that in just a bit. And then ultimately knitting together the space is this series of catenary lighting that is supported by these poles. Again, the notion here is we really wanted to try to pull this motif out from the neighborhood. If you go down some of the streets in Chinatown, you'll see they have the lanterns strung across the street from building to building. This is a sort of an iconic image, particularly with all the restaurants that have now populated the streets. And it's not something that you really experience as you're walking along Canal Street. So we thought that this was a really great opportunity to start to bring that out from the neighborhood a little bit. And also we're trying to design it in a way where, 24/7, there'll be sort of that soft lights, but that it can also be flexible enough to support more rotating or temporary art installations, whether that's custom lantern designs, maybe something that's a little bit larger to support in terms of a sculpture. So we're trying to build in as much dynamism into this small site as we can and provide as many opportunities for the community to really engage in the programming and make it a successful space, while also ensuring from a DOT perspective that the circulation through the space is maintained, and we're really providing a pleasant experience for those walking along Canal Street. So again, speaking to that very point, looking at just sort of the circulation and how we're trying to pull that circulation right now, it runs right adjacent to traffic. It's not a very pleasant experience. It's a fairly narrow path that actually wasn't there until just a couple years ago when the agency expanded this triangle slightly. So you can see in the proposed, really trying to free up circulation through the existing ginkgo trees, but maintain that sort of strong east-west, and then the north-south along Baxter Street is preserved sort of as it is today. So just giving folks a little bit more detail now that we've started to get into the weeds. Again, this is a section cut through this larger space. You can see the two planting beds that flank either side of the triangle. We're looking at, standard concrete sidewalk here, but underneath would be structural soil. So so we're providing, again, that just additional volume for the trees to grow. And we have that buffer along Canal Street as well as Walker, the seating of the city bench, and then the digital information kiosk here on the right. And then as you get to the narrower side of the triangle, again, giving you all a bit more detail on what we're thinking here. So you can see the buffer planting along Canal Street. Then we have the permeable paving that would be supported by silvicels or a similar type system. So again, we have a smaller tree pit opening that is there now, but ultimately a lot more soil volume for the existing trees to ensure that they remain healthy. And we had an on-site with the Parks Department in January. It was one of the coldest days of the year, but we were able to get them out there. And I think ultimately at a conceptual level, they're supportive of this approach. Obviously, following on from this hearing, we'll engage them in their more formal review and approval process. But we think we're on the right track in terms of finding that right balance between tree health and preserving those trees, adding new trees to the site, and also preserving circulation. I'll move through the next couple slides. These are just some overall views. We did create a 3D model to really try and study how this space works from a whole bunch of different angles. You'll see in particular for the screen that there's a couple different configurations because this is one of those areas we're still very much in design development in terms of what makes most sense for that overall configuration of the screen and how can we deliver sort of the best balance of programming and content. But you can see the catenary lighting system that runs through, again, the ginkgo bosque on the sort of right side of the screen, and then the more active space on the left here in the foreground. So this is crossing Walker Street. So as you're approaching from Chinatown, sort of leaving the neighborhood, you can see Canal Street in the background. This is approaching the wider side of the triangle with the plantings, the ginkgo bosque, again with the permeable pavement, the digital screen, and the catenary lighting system. Here we have two views from either side of the triangle. So this is the narrower side as you're moving through that ginkgo bosque. And then on the wider side of the triangle, sort of looking at the digital information kiosk and as you would be moving through the trees in the background. And then we wanted to make sure again that this space really works from multiple angles. So here we have, as you're approaching from Canal Street, you can see the sort of the back side of the digital screen that's flanked by that planting bed. Again, the ginkgo tree in the back, you have the catenary lighting system. And then as you're crossing Baxter, as if you were walking east-west along Canal Street, again, being able to see sort of that circulation space through. The rest of the presentation, we're going to walk through sort of the key design elements in a little bit more detail. Obviously, we're happy to answer any questions along the way. The screen itself, we've done quite a bit of research on the technology side in terms of what works, what's out there. I think we're bolstered by the fact that we do have a lot of screens out on city sidewalks at the moment. There's the Link NYC information kiosk, the Samusa newsstands and JC2Co newsstands and bus shelters. So we know that this technology works in an outdoor setting. Obviously on the private side in terms of retail stores, or you get your crazy billboards in Times Square. So fundamentally we know that the technology is there and that we can deliver something that will perform. And that is ultimately maintainable. Again, we're still very much developing the final design details for this piece of infrastructure, but we did spend a lot of time from that last meeting in December until now working through the research, seeing what is out there, what's possible, and then also talking with the community about what makes most sense. Is this something that's a viable alternative to the existing 9x9 kiosk structure that's on site? And ultimately, we've received very positive responses from both the community boards as well as the local stakeholders, as well as the cultural institutions that we've started to engage in what the content of this might look like. As I mentioned a little earlier in the presentation, we are still thinking about what the configuration of this screen or screens looks like. There's pros and cons to both in terms of the visual impact of a larger monolithic structure compared to the potential breaking it up in from a maintenance perspective and also from a potential content and programming perspective. Having multiple screens also allows some visibility through the site to the plantings, to Canal Street. So there's, I think we're happy to have this discussion in more detail. I don't want to dwell on it too much here. I think DOT's preference is leaning towards the multiple screen configuration on the right, just because we see that, at least from our discussion with product vendors, as well as overall potential for maintenance and programming opportunities as slightly more preferable, but both definitely have their merit. We've also been spending a lot of time thinking through what the content of these will look like and how that's going to work. And this sort of breaks into three main buckets. I want to be very clear that in no way are we expecting this amenity to support advertising. This is really designed and will be regulated by DOT as an amenity structure that's intended to be for neighborhood programming and content. That said, we do recognize from a financial perspective that it's going to take funding to maintain this type of infrastructure. And so we do have similar examples where we look at more of a sponsorship model where a company can obviously provide financial support and they would be allowed to put their name or logo on the structure in some manner or form, but that it would be restricted to no more than 10% of the total area. We do think, given the potential for this to have rotating programming and content, particularly associated with art or cultural exhibits, that there may be an opportunity for sponsorship of those exhibits, similar to how a museum might operate. But that's still very much up for discussion. Again, our goal from the DOT perspective is we want to make sure that the infrastructure that we're putting out there is ultimately sustainable, can be maintained, and can be supported by the local partner. Generally speaking, one of the key functions we actually are seeing for the digital information screen is on the wayfinding and information front. So obviously there's a number of examples of these across the country and across the world. We have digital examples of our Walk NYC map already being used by MTA and subway stations. That's this image here on the bottom right. And we do really think that this structure has the ability to deliver information and wayfinding to folks using this space in a much more dynamic and useful way than a static structure. We also think that it has the ability to support sort of the same type of interaction that you might have with a staff person at the existing kiosk. We can do digitally, right, via audio video technology. It's easy enough to have a person from the Chinatown Partnership be sitting in their office and be able to interact with somebody on site through this technology. So one of the things that we heard was
in a bloody subway attack that a witness.
One of the things that we did here was that having that human touch is really helpful on site, and so we want to make sure that this technology can support that in the long term. We've also tried to design the site so that if the partnership wants to set up a table and chair, they can still have a staff presence on site, for instance. And then last but certainly not least, I think the thing that we see most beneficial for this structure is the ability to have it programmed on a rotating basis with neighborhood generated either art or historic information or cultural programming. And we've had a number of conversations so far with MoCA, with Think Chinatown, with a number of other organizations for what this content will start to look like. Generally speaking, we have the DOT art program within the agency, so there's a fairly open and transparent process for how we can manage that content on a rotating basis. And we feel really confident that there's a wealth of access to artists and information and potential programming that will really make this a truly interesting site and something that can really represent the neighborhood and start to get, I think, at what Commissioner Armstead was saying at the conceptual level, but really make it a dynamic and interactive site for the neighborhood and have it be programmed with information that's about the neighborhood. So we're excited about this development. Obviously, we recognize there's a lot that goes into this. We're happy to discuss it in much more detail, but we do see this as a sort of a natural evolution in this space and something that can really deliver on what we heard from the community as well as the commission at the conceptual level. Getting into some of the infrastructure details. So again, this is zooming in a little bit more on the permeable pavement and what we're thinking. So if any of you have been to Four Freedoms Park out on Roosevelt Island, it's a similar surface expression that I think we're going for in terms of a bonded aggregate material. We're not looking at loose stone per se, right? We don't want that to be kicked up and drifted around, particularly given how busy Canal Street is. And as I was mentioning, having the sort of soil support or the pavement support system be able to allow that root growth. We are looking at a slightly higher curb along the Canal Street to provide some buffering and added protection to the plantings. Again, we know this is a really tough space. It's going to be tough to keep the plants alive, but we want to do every little thing that we can to make sure that they have the greatest chance at really fulfilling that function and providing the buffer that we're hoping to achieve. Lighting is obviously a key aspect of this site. Again, looking at the catenary system, I think a simple string light will be sort of the baseline proposal, and having that run through the site will be a really nice nighttime effect, particularly in concert with the trees. But then there is also that opportunity to do more custom light features on a rotating basis. I think there's obviously a huge number of examples of the different kinds of lanterns that are already expressed in the neighborhood, and how that can evolve is also very exciting in our minds. This just gets at some of the details. Again, we've been looking at a number of manufacturers and vendors that specialize in the cable system that's needed to support not just the string lights, but also heavier pieces of infrastructure. And then ultimately, the bottom right, we are trying to make sure that we're being cognizant about what the utility infrastructure is going to look like on site. We will need to have an electric box that houses a meter so that ultimately the electricity on the site can be paid for. And we're looking right now at mounting that on one of the catenary poles so that we're not taking up any planting space or sort of valuable circulation space. The planting details, again, apologies that this is a little bit difficult to read, but this is the more detailed planting plan. Just looking at some of the overall configuration, again, on the tree side, keeping within the palette of the existing ginkgos. The two new ones that we would be adding would just be a columnar cultivar, given how close they are to Canal Street. Looking at a fairly standard cherry tree that's part of the park's approved street tree list as that more ornamental set of trees on the sort of west side of the triangle. And then really a palette of fairly tried and true smaller deciduous shrubs and ground covers and grasses to ensure that there's year-round interest and ultimately a palette that we think can withstand some of these tougher growing conditions. And then last but not least is just thinking about the programming. Again, one of the recommendations was to work with the local cultural institutions like MoCA and think about how this site can be used in context of our current design. And so these are just some examples, but I think we're really trying to make sure that we can hit on all of the functionality that the triangle and the space really needs to serve. Obviously, tour groups is a huge deal currently, well, pre-pandemic at least. And so we think that that's easily supported. Removing that existing kiosk really frees up the space for more dynamic performances. Again, we think there's a huge opportunity in terms of temporary art on the site, both the sort of video art that we can support with the digital information kiosk, as well as other physical expressions, whether that be on the catenary system or as again, a temporary sculpture. And then also still allowing for tabling or smaller information to be distributed, since that's, again, a really important and common practice in the neighborhood. And then I'll just wrap up quickly with, we have been thinking about, from a construction perspective, how this could be phased. We have been working with our funding partners at LMDC to get through this design phase, but we still are looking for additional funding to fill out the remaining needs for delivering this as a whole project. And so we're trying to be cognizant of all of the different scenarios. I think we're confident that we will be able to get the full funding that we need, but if we can't, we do think that there is a way to phase this where we could deliver some of the circulation improvements on the eastern part of the triangle with the permeable pavement, preserving the trees, introducing the buffer, even introducing sort of the first part of the catenary lighting system while preserving the existing kiosk. Given it, again, there has been a lot of discussion in the community about the important functions that provides. This is certainly not ideal from our perspective, but we think it is, again, a workable first phase. And these are just some quick renderings in terms of what that starts to look like. And then ultimately we would be able to then come back in with a second phase and really modernize the kiosk with the new digital information structure, and then finish out the remaining infrastructure pieces. So we're, very, I think, pleased with how this design has evolved, particularly given some of the contentiousness we saw with the community and the previous proposal. We were able to secure unanimous approval from Community Board 3, which was very exciting. We received very nice comments from Community Board 1, and we've continued to have very productive discussions with the Chinatown Partnership, who will ultimately be our partner in maintaining this space, as well as, again, the cultural institutions. That was one of the recommendations coming out from December. So with that, happy to answer any questions, or obviously if there's any public testimony, happy to address that as well.
Hi, we have one person who has signed up to testify on the project. Yin Kong, I'm going to unmute you now.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Nick, for the update on this. I am the director of Think Chinatown. We're a nonprofit based in Manhattan, Chinatown. Our work intersects storytelling, arts, and neighborhood engagement. As a resident, as an urban design architect, I have been following this project for many, many years, since the very beginning. So it's exciting to see, well, there've definitely been ups and downs, and seeing where it is today. Also to let you guys know that Think Chinatown was the curator behind the lighting installation that Nick mentioned earlier on Mott and on Baird now. So we were the ones connecting to the artists to curate the artwork on the lanterns and figuring out how to weatherize and like install it. So that is the Light Up Chinatown initiative. So I have a few comments that I've shared already with Nick and Neil before, and I'd like to share again here. So this project is replacing that iconic gesture of the original proposal. And so I still think there is a need for kind of this iconic moment of arrival. It is like the arrival, it is the way that we can show pride in our community and showcase, like, our perspective. So I think there still is missing a little bit of that moment. I understand in this design, they're being dependent on the screens for that moment, but I still feel like there's room for a little bit more. I'm actually an advocate for something even more analog, not screens, but just like billboard space. The billboard above, that's like the iPhones that Apple has, right? That really defines your space, and that's just an analog billboard. And just thinking about how, if we have residencies and we have artists that are creating art for that billboard that's hosted within the space, that could actually do a lot to enliven that space and claim it for ourselves. As for the video art, there are projects that Think Chinatown works on. There's a storytelling program that we do called Everyday Chinatown, where we interview seniors in Mandarin Cantonese and English about everyday Chinatown objects like a bagua or a medicine pot, things that maybe outsiders don't understand what they are. And we capture stories about that. And we've actually worked with artists to either make displays or animated illustrations from that. I can send a link to that later. And we've also done things like walks with urban archives. So this could even be something where QR code can activate even more interaction with our neighborhood, and also have a place where residents and community members have a place to tell our story and our perspective of our neighborhood. One really big thing that I find missing so far is a physical wayfinding solution. It's a very confusing intersection, and I still think that the pavement would be a very good opportunity to have a physical orientation, because there's just too much confusion. And even with the finger pointing signs, it's still confusing. Something about being able to like step on these lines to walk in a direction, I think would be helpful. And then something else I want to bring up is, there is that conversation of, whether or not to get the kiosk, right? And I think something that could help us get beyond, maybe get the partnership more comfortable with the removal of the kiosk, right, is if we have a bit more of a solid solution on adaptable designs for when a human does want to occupy that space, to be physically present to give directions. I think we can all agree the current manifestation is a bit difficult for the human to be interacting with visitors. But if we have a more solid design for using passive design to keep that human comfortable. Like I know, it was too hot or too cold was something of a concern, and they kept adding more to the kiosk, right, to make that comfortable. And so if we think of a better solution, including storage, maybe it'll make sense to remove the kiosk, because I agree the flow is definitely a lot better in this design. And I'll just add one last thing about the digital, the video use of the screen. It definitely will take a lot of programming to make sure that this video is something that is representative of the community, and will take resources to curate. And I hope it won't be some sort of like just ads for different things that are happening, even if it's just happening in the neighborhood. It should be something beautiful and representative of our community. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm just double checking. Yeah, so we don't have anyone else signed up, Signe.
Okay, thank you. So maybe I'll just start and say that I think this design has come a long way. And I'm particularly pleased to see the catenary lighting system. I think it's a very appropriate place to test this out. And I guess I also, Nick, you've done a lot to address the issues related to digital, but if approved, I just want to go on record and say that this would not be setting a standard or a precedent for use of digital signage in parks or in plazas. So I'd be interested in commissioners' opinions about, I do have one simple question. How tall are the poles supporting the catenary lights?
So they're in the renderings, they're drawn at 20 feet. Ultimately, we still have to finalize that with the pole manufacturer. And obviously it's a little bit based on the soil bearing capacity, but that's what we're imagining. So not a full height street light and not quite the 14-foot pedestrian pole scale, because we don't want folks to be able to reach up and mess with anything that might be hanging from the lights.
Right, okay, thank you. So I'd be interested in commissioners' opinions on first of all, response to the testimony with regard to a kiosk or some other physical element that would create this iconic entrance. And number two, if analog, digital, single screen, multiple screens. So would anyone like to weigh in on those points?
I had a few thoughts. when you look in plan view, I'm just curious, like what happens behind the screen, because it's very thin in plan view, but I think that's very, there would be some kind of equipment. So what's the view from, say, like across the street of what that looks like? It looks like the tree is maybe covering it a little bit, but I think that would require a lot of, kind of equipment to run that. And then the other thing too is the brightness levels. It's a very large screen, I think, especially if I think I saw one dimension that's 17, that's at 17 by 6. So that's, that's really, really bright. And that's something that's meant to be viewed from almost like, that scale. It's something to be viewed from like almost, 100 feet away or something. So it's a very different experience when, you're up close. So I think, some kind of sensitivity about what the intensity of the light is there. I think if, moving forward with this, I think that'd be important to do. And then just what counts as advertising as well, because in a way, if you think of Chinatown, it's a lot of small businesses. So I think there'd be some interest in maybe promoting, local restaurants, but then, you don't want it to be this kind of, just advertising for businesses too. So I think the guidelines need to be kind of specific about that. And I think I would actually favor personally, an analog system. I think it does, kind of make sense to have like a series of installations, because I just know that, like, even from personal experience working on these projects, like managing the content of the screen over like 5 or 10 years, it's very costly to do that, to even produce the equipment, or, I think you could do something where you make a CMS, almost like a, but it's essentially as involving as making like a network television. So I think it does require kind of like a lot of work to do that.
Yeah, no, I Commissioner, I think those are all fair points. I will say, from the equipment perspective, we are thinking that a majority of sort of the electric and utility hookups will actually come into this box that's located on the pole. And then the equipment for supporting the screens themselves will be mostly in the base, so that there won't necessarily be a huge impact there. But again, that's something that as we get into the further detailing of that, we will be paying very close attention to. We did have, we are trying to envision the view coming across here as, the screens themselves being mostly screened by the planting, and sort of that experience being something that you have. And that's one of the other reasons why we liked the multiple screen setup, is it does allow that sight line through to the actual triangle behind, and sort of breaks up the amount of space that might be attractive to undesirable uses, whether it be vandalism, graffiti, yada, yada. But that is, we are trying to pay very close attention to that. And certainly from a technology perspective, I think we've seen products that allow for these kinds of dimensions. But that's definitely one of the things that we're trying to be very mindful of. On the brightness question, I think we are looking more at LCD screen technology as opposed to LED. That's something that evolved actually fairly recently after more conversations with vendors. And most of the LCD products that we've seen have the ability to control that level of brightness. And so we would imagine that it would be, very low at early morning hours where you don't have a lot of traffic. And so there's an ability for it to be variable is sort of the understanding that we have on that front. And then obviously, the content management piece is going to be really key. We certainly understand that aspect and are working that through. I think we have, luckily, a lot of great cultural institutions and nonprofits. I think Chinatown, I'll give you a shout out, and that there's already been a lot of content produced in that respect. So I think that we have a lot of opportunity there to build on all of the great work that's happening in the neighborhood already. And I say with an analog solution, it is not obviously quite as dynamic. There is quite a lot of work that has to go into putting up and taking down particular exhibits, the printing costs, so on and so forth. So there is, not that it's unachievable, of course, but there is a lot of benefits that we see in terms of what we're able to do and what we'll be able to do in a more dynamic and interactive way with the digital technology. I don't know, Neil, if there's anything I missed on that front, but I just wanted to try to cover all of your points, Commissioner.
I want to concur with Manuel and say that I do appreciate the reasoning before about an analog divider, just because there is going to be a lot of, I would question, like, in terms of what kind of advertising there would be, and if it's a corporate advertising, like how, how that will function, and, will it just be overtaken? Because I understand in terms of also the pedestrian walkway or the traffic, when you walk around and you see a huge billboard, you tend to slow down and get distracted. So, I mean, I don't know if that's something that you're considering, but I really feel like it may be an opportunity to work more closely together with the community and learn ways to curate based on different cultural events or cultural calendar events. I think that would be really useful. I'm not sure if it will translate best digitally or analog, but perhaps because I'm an artist, I really feel like it may be the best way to do it would be as an analog project.
So I'd like to also add, can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Hi, Nick. So I want to thank Nick and also Kong for presenting the project. I know it's a really challenging site, and it's been through a lot of transformations in the study from the competition to now. And so I'm sympathetic. I spent a lot of time right by here. I'm looking out at Canal Street right now. And this is, everybody knows, is a very intense and active site. One thing that's missing from these renderings is the traffic, which is just constant and loud. I mean, it's going on right now, and it's not even rush hour. So it's, it's a small space. It's meant to be a bit of a kind of rest moment. You catch your breath. You kind of figure out, okay, I'm going to go. This is Chinatown. This is great. If I don't know the area, I want to figure out where to go. I love the idea of this kind of physical wayfinding in the pavement that Yin suggested. I'm also weighing myself onto this analog side, although I think a QR code would be great, because lots of people engage with those and you could get a lot of information. But I'm just concerned with, people are people really going to stand there for very much a long period of time with all of this noise and chaos going on to take information in? It's very intense right there, and I don't think I'm exaggerating that in the least. And I think that what you're doing to clear it out and have some trees in a moment to kind of have some canopy overhead is really great. I also was thinking about the color of the pavement. I just wanted to, so now I'm going to a detail moment, which is you reference what's on Roosevelt Island. I remember going out there and looking at it and go, wow, that's interesting. It doesn't, it's not permeable. And I would just say, the color tonality of that needs to be looked at carefully, because this is wild here, and there's a lot of exhaust and dirt, it's just like the dirt on my windows is intense. So not that you need to match the dirt, but I mean, I don't think anybody's going to be out there hosing this off daily. So it's, it's just, I know you're all thinking about that because you all know the site really well too. But I just am not really so keen on putting digital signs in parks. And although I am sympathetic with wanting to get information and, the story of the neighborhood across, and I just would hope there might be other creative ways. I do like the big billboard. If you could grab that thing for art or whatever. I mean, that's it's kind of the big little thing happening there. But so I'm going to weigh on the analog.
Could I just mention one thing? There will be no advertising per se here. It is prohibited. Nick mentioned sponsorship, which really has a very strict code for public space. So that's one thing. And another is, again, this is intended not to be a park. It's not a designated plaza. This is intended to be a gateway, a passage through from east to west, and that was what we heard you know, to accommodate all the traffic. So I think you're right in the sense that the balance of people, the time that they spend at whatever is available there versus, you know, what time they move through it is key in getting it right. But again, this isn't a park. It's a public circulation space, and that's what we heard from the community and everyone else that it really is intended to do.
Ethel, Susan, Richard, love to hear from you all.
Okay.
I have nothing to add. Thanks, Susan.
I just, I appreciate the progress that has been made since seeing it the last time, whether the interaction with the community, the sensitivity to a number of the points that we all had emphasized and you are adhering to. I echo, I'm not the specialist, but I do think that, and I think it's very important that number one, it's not a park, as you said, and it may be a hybrid, but it's extremely important. It's a transition point, but it's one that between very complicated and interesting neighborhoods and communities, but unfortunately is almost always for the layperson dominated by cars. And it's a hard place to traverse. So I echo all the points made about, think about the pollution, think about the car, think about drivers being distracted by exciting digital displays, but that may be distracting to them rather than with the great goal of being informative to those who want to see, who are walking by. I think it's terrific to do this. I very much look forward. I'm often there, but often going from place to place, and some time ago had the privilege to do some studies in Chinatown, and I was there a lot and appreciate it very much. And maybe we should all be careful. I hope you don't think it's just snarky, I can't help it. Too many uses of the word iconic. It's too much. Yeah, go back and think about what iconic is supposed to mean, and then realize everybody shouldn't use it every time for everything. It just has become diluted, unclear, and that's my pet peeve. The rest I congratulate and look forward.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Richard, I missed what you said at the beginning, right before Ethel started speaking.
Who are you?
Yeah.
Sydney, who are you saying?
I think Richard Moore said something just before.
Signe, I'm sorry. I was just saying I don't have anything to add at this point.
Oh, I see. Thank you. Thank you.
So I think we do have to move on. Yeah, and I see that you have raised your hand. You have something to say. We just have, just real quick.
Yeah, I forgot to add another piece of the analog suggestion was actually on the bench. That is an opportunity where we can make a non-iconic gesture on the site. An example is Ming Fei, his sculptural pieces, which are benches at the Whitehall Ferry Terminal. You know, Ming Fei is an artist here based in Chinatown, a very famous artist. We've shown him before. Something like that could both serve a very, useful purpose and also contribute to bringing character to the space. And I also thank you for, I'm very glad that the commissioners have voiced their opinion about analog, because I very much agree on that as well. And thank you to Neil and Nick.
Thank you.
I'll try to quickly summarize, and then we're going to take a vote. So the things that I heard for DOT and the design team to think about moving forward. This is not an order of priority. It's how I wrote it down. Thinking about the color of pavement relative to the kind of dirt and grime. The concern about advertising, which has been answered. The notion of perhaps embedding some physical wayfinding in the pavement. And then for those commissioners who weighed in, there was a majority in favor of an analog system. My personal feeling on that is I think I would also prefer analog, and I would also prefer something that was a bit more porous, visually porous, as opposed to a solid kind of arc of signage, recognizing that we can't really compete with a billboard. So let us take a vote. You can approve, reject, table, or abstain. And if you would like your vote to be accompanied by a final statement, please feel free to do so. So I'll take it in alphabetical order, starting with Lori.
Can I approve with those remarks that you added?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I do.
Manuel?
Let's see. I'm trying to think. Okay, I guess, I'll approve with also, with the condition of seeing development of what the screen might become with the kind of content management system, or, a kind of analog alternative. Is it okay to state it that way?
Yes.
Okay.
Of course. Richard?
I'll approve with your comments added.
Okay. Susan?
Approve with Sigda's comments.
Ethel?
Approve with the last comments of the two commissioners who spoke.
Mary?
Approve with the conditions and comments.
And myself approve. So it is unanimously approved, but there clearly needs to be a lot of rethinking on the signage and the way in which the community's voices can be heard, as well as to think about making wayfinding more evident, manifest in the space. So thank you very much, team. And we will now move on to item 27720, the reconstruction of Sankofa Park, including an African burial ground memorial landscape located in Brooklyn.
Signe, I just want to note real quick, if anyone's watching on YouTube and you would like to give public testimony on this project, you can find a link in the video description where you can sign in and instructions on how to join us here in Zoom. Okay.
Let's unmute Jeff Martin. I believe he's presenting. And I'll give you control, Jeff. When I share my screen.
Hey, Jeff, we don't hear you quite yet. Can you try again? No, I don't think your audio is connected quite yet.
Oh.
I think he needs to log back in.
To log back in, okay. Sheena, is there anybody else who can start, or should we wait for Jeff? Sorry, Sheena. Oh, there's Jeff. Maybe he's... Okay. Okay. There we go.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
Sorry about that.
Let me give you control. Jeff Martin, there you are.
Okay, I think I'm good. I got it now. Okay. So, hi everyone, I'm Jeff Martin. I am the Deputy Director of Landscape Architecture at New York City Parks, and I'm honored to be presenting Sankofa Park as part of the design team here at Parks. This 0.85 acre site dates back to the 17th century, where it was historically used as a burial ground. At least a portion of the site was used as a burial ground. And in our research, we've determined that it was mainly for free and enslaved peoples of West African descent. We've been working for a few years now with elected officials, community groups, and the descendant community to create a special place to commemorate those who were buried at the park. We also want to create a cultural destination or a cultural education destination within the community here at the site, all the while maintaining an active recreation area for the existing playground and the basketball court. The site is located in New Lots, the New Lots section of Brooklyn, just south of Livonia Avenue, between Schenck and Barbay. And I'll skip through some of these site analysis slides pretty quickly, but we're out of the flood zone, out of an MS4 area, and mostly surrounded by 1- and 2-family residential, with a library just to the south of our site. You can see it here in blue. This is the New Lots section, or the New Lots Public Library. And we've been working closely with them as they're also going through a renovation in the area. So we're working closely with them to create this cultural hub, an area that would be connected. Both spaces would be connected as they share the same lot. You can see the neighborhood context. There are a few other active recreation parks and playgrounds around. And landing here on our existing conditions. So on this slide, you can see the playground and the basketball court, the handball court as they exist now, and the layout of those features within the playground. You can see the portion there in yellow, which is the historic burial ground that cuts up through our site. And I'll get to more info on that in a minute, but just keep in mind that the eastern edge of our site there is where the burial ground was. The western edge was historically a school. And again, I'll get to this in a moment, but it was a school and a playground throughout the use of this site. So moving on to some pictures, here's a view into the park. You can see kind of the condition of the park. It's not so great. Looking in and moving through the site, there's the comfort station with the play equipment there to the south, the 2 to 5 play equipment and swings, and the 5 to 12 play equipment. You can see the 3 train running above there on Livonia Avenue. And moving in a little bit more, the spray shower area surrounded by some seating. This is the area where the historic burial ground is underneath. So you can see the handball wall and the basketball court here, and then the seating area to the south end, the southeast end of the site, which is where the burial ground, which sits above the burial ground as well. Here's the comfort station, located just outside of the extents of the burial ground. And the reinterment marker. So during our archaeological research, we did discover some bone fragments on site, kind of confirming the use of this as a burial ground. In 2019, along with the community, we reinterred these human remains back into the site, into a test pit area that we dug up during the archaeological work. And here you can see the reinterment marker in picture 2 as it exists today. And you can see the location of that within the site. And again, that area, we chose this area specifically. It's one of the test pits that was dug during the archaeological excavation. We did not want to excavate any other areas within the site. We didn't want to discover any other bone fragments. This site has been, over the years, we didn't find any intact burials. So any excavation that happens here has the possibility of finding human remains in the form of fragments, mostly. Getting into a little bit of the site history. So again, dating back to the 17th century, this lot itself was a public space. There was a school on the western end of the site, and a cemetery on the eastern end. One thing I want to note here is across Livonia Avenue, the Dutch Reformed Church and its cemetery, this still exists today, and this is just south of New Lots Avenue. This cemetery is where the remains of those early Dutch settlers were buried, and again, that still remains. The historic cemetery, which stretches from south from New Lots up past Livonia Avenue and intersects through a portion of our site, was mainly used as a burial ground for, and again, I had said this earlier, but for free and enslaved peoples of West African descent. In the 50s, New York City turned this area into a playground on our current boundary, and then the library there to the south, as you can see in that 1966 aerial. And here's just a few images from the early 20th century of PS 72, which was demolished, and then the burial ground also. So everything you see here is part of our site. From the very beginning in working with the community, we understood that the burial ground, the area where the burial ground was, and the portion of our site that burial ground remains underneath should become a commemorative area. And that the western edge of our site, being that it was historically a school, we could focus the active recreation over to the western edge of the site. In working with the community, other cultural experts, and the archaeologists, we really tried to drive down on some concepts that could act as a, to honor those people who were buried there. And we really wanted these concepts to kind of carry out throughout the site, again, as a way to commemorate those who were buried there. So, for example, a griot is a West African orator who passes down the history of the peoples through spoken and sung word. We use the griot as kind of a concept to define an education space, and you'll see that here in a minute. We also use some other traditional West African cloths as a way to define physical spaces within the site, some angles and some concentric circles. Moving on to the schematic plan, you can see the playground with the swings is moved over to the western edge of the site, and the basketball court moved from the where the burial ground was over to the southwest portion of the site. Where the burial ground was is a commemorative area with that features two distinct but connected areas, a more passive area, which is highlighted by an oval lawn, and then an education area, which is meant to be used for education and other community gatherings. Drilling down to that space a little bit further, you can see that oval lawn surrounded by seating. This is an area meant for reflection. It's surrounded by a canopy of trees to really create a room-like feeling. And then that area south, it's more of an open area. There's a teaching platform in the center where the griot or the educator would stand and educate to those who stood around him. The reinterment marker is also located in this area. Altogether, the commemorative area has rich materiality, includes cultural references, and really expands the green space to create more of a park-like setting. Just a quick view of what that education area would look like with the reinterment marker raised and turned towards the griot stone. Some other defining site elements are a vegetated buffer, which would really be used to create that park-like atmosphere and buffer it between the passive or the commemorative area and the active recreation area. The concentric circular granite pavers are meant to capture that West African cloth. The griot stone, which is in the middle, really harkens back again to the West African poet and storyteller. And the materiality of the griot stone and the reinterment marker really show how important these pieces within this site are. Moving north to the passive area, again, I had mentioned before, this is really defined by kind of an oval lawn. That lawn with seating around it. That lawn, the slope of the lawn is meant to mimic the existing and the historic topography of the site, which sloped up from south to north. So as you made your way from New Lots up to Livonia, there was a slope up from there, and that's the same thing that the lawn will do. We used granite throughout, including like a granite wall around it, which is really meant to mimic the materiality which many of the people who are buried here used to build the city and the New Lots area. And again, the granite pavers in concentric circles around the defining features. I mentioned before that we want to be careful when excavating. So within our schematic grading plan, we're planning to raise everything, at least what we can. We're planning to raise it up to avoid unnecessary excavation. We're working closely with LPC and SHPO on this, or the State Historic Preservation Office on this. Throughout the site, we're going to lower the fences down to 4 feet to get a better view into the site, again, to create a more park-like atmosphere. It'll be all standard fencing with the exception of a few symbols that we've worked into our standard fence. So for example, we have the IPA, the Adrinkra symbol for justice that will be along the top rail of our fence. We really worked closely with the community to choose these 4 symbols, which are part, again, of the Adrinkran alphabet, which is a culture within the West African community. And just detailing that out a little bit further. Our circulation diagram shows the entrances into the park, as well as the gated access point. This gate will be able to be locked so that, you know, an area that could just be locked out at different times throughout the day, or if events are being held in one area and we wanted to close off the more active recreation area from the commemorative area, you could. And here's a view of what that interface would look like. We're going to use our standard lighting plan. We're working closely with DOT to develop this, but we are introducing lighting to the site through standard poles. Our other site furnishing will remain standard. We're going to add a drinking fountain to the comfort station. Materiality here, it's muted, darker colors, natural colors, and we're continuing that throughout all of our, the palette of everything that we're using here on site. And here's just an example of some pavers that we're planning on introducing to the commemorative area. Granite pavers, again, as I've discussed before, to kind of create that rich feeling of the commemorative area. One area where we've chosen to pop our colors a little bit in a respectful way is in the play equipment. So this play equipment is fun. You can see lots of ramps going up to different play features. The colors, again, black, grays, muted browns, but the community had a desire to introduce the colors red, yellow, and green into the site, which are the colors of the Pan-African flag. We designed a new spray shower for in the playground. And we're working closely with the community here on our commemorative signage. So this isn't complete yet, but the thoughts are that we would have 3 signs within the commemorative area, one focusing on land use, one focusing on the African community and New Lots, and the other focusing on education and this concept of Sankofa, which means looking back to go forward and is the name of the park. Schematic planting, you can see that canopy of trees surrounding the oval lawn and around the education area. And then all throughout, we chose a palette of easy to maintain, fragrant, hardy shrubs, perennials. And the site permeability study really just showing here what we're creating, what we're trying to create with a lot more park-like feeling. could see before, existing permeability was almost non-existent. We're introducing a lot more planting beds along the edges and the interior of the space, really to create that park-like feeling. And I'll end here on a perspective just to get a sense of scale and a sense of how the spaces are connected. And that's the end of our presentation. We're happy to take any questions.
Signe, we do not have anyone signed up for testimony.
Okay. Thank you, Jeff. So I was not aware what Sankofa meant. So I just looked up on the Parks Department website what the historic sign is. And I would seriously urge the Parks Department to revise that plaque. It is, it erases totally the history of the past here and the West African presence, and this is as a sacred site. So I would please urge you to quickly rewrite that sign.
This is Nancy. Absolutely, we'll do that.
So I'm very pleased with the alterations that have been made since we last reviewed this, but I would like to hear from other commissioners if they have opinions or questions.
I just wanted to say that I am feeling positive about the changes that have been made in terms of the design, and I feel like you guys are going in the right direction. I feel like it is an opportunity to afford a proper space of reflection for the people who were there and who were buried there. And I would consider also perhaps using those motifs, not just in the gates, but also perhaps somewhere in the play area, so that maybe there's a sort of an imprint or a thread along the entire space that would recognize the same symbols and offer an opportunity for children to recognize those symbols as something that is related to themselves or the community.
Yes, I quite like those symbols too.
Anyone else?
I also agree and support what's been said and support the work that's being done on this this park. Important to make enough space.
I was just going to say, I really like what you've done at the end of the park with the griot stone and the sloping lawn. Very attractive.
I also agree that you've been very responsive and the design has come a long way. And I'm just wondering, and perhaps I missed this, there was meant to be, there was a board that was for community messages that was adjacent to the comfort station. And I wonder if that is now not part of the program, or has that moved elsewhere?
We thought a vegetated buffer was a more appropriate approach there. We felt like the screen and the panel really took away from what the space should be, and really mainly took away from the marker. We wanted to keep the focus on the griot stone and the marker themselves as important pieces of that education area. And we felt that what we could accomplish with the screen could be accomplished in the signage that we hope to put in that education area.
I see. Okay, thank you. And I agree completely that it's preferable to have the plant material do the screening. I just wasn't clear on whether the community had specifically asked for signage that was separate apart from the interpretive signage that you're doing there, but you've explained that it's the one and the same. So I think that was a great solution.
Okay. This is all sounding very encouraging. We'll now take a vote. I just want to, I think, summarize a couple things that were said. One, to consider continuing the historic thread of symbols into the playground. and continue to refine details associated with the reinterment marker and rewriting the park's website signage. So I will now call for a vote. You may approve, reject, table, or abstain. Again, alphabetical order. Lori?
Approve.
Deborah?
Approve.
Manuel?
Approve.
Richard?
Approve.
Susan?
I'm trying to unmute.
Approve.
Thank you, Susan. Ethel?
Approve.
Mary?
Approve.
And myself approve. So it is unanimous. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And unless there are any other comments, we will adjourn the public meeting.
Commissioners, if you could stay on, I just wanted to recap the earlier discussion on our design awards.